This is my true story. I worked my entire life to build a future for my son. I believed that when my hair turned gray and my hands grew weak, he would care for me the way I once cared for him. But one night, as I prepared a small dinner for myself, he grabbed my plate, threw it straight into the trash, and laughed in my face. "You don't deserve food," he said. That was the moment my heart broke, and the moment I knew what I had to do. Before I tell you, comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my stories can reach more people. All my life, I lived with one purpose: to give my son a better life than the one I had. I was born with nothing, raised on scraps, and worked since boyhood to survive. But when he came into this world, I swore that he would never feel the sting of hunger the way I had. So I worked harder than my body allowed. I took double shifts, extra hours, jobs that broke my back and stole my sleep. My hands became calloused, my bones ached, but every dollar I earned, I saved for him. I paid for his education from the first day of school to the last exam he took in university. I gave up vacations, comforts, even medical care for myself so he could have tuition money. When he wanted a car, I bought him one. When he wanted a home, I helped him with the down payment. Every step of his journey was paved by the sacrifices I made silently. People around me would say, "You spoil him too much. One day, he won't appreciate it," but I never believed them. I told myself that my love would be enough, that he would see my sacrifices and repay them with respect. And it wasn't just money. It was time. Every night, no matter how tired I was, I sat with him while he did his homework. I listened to his dreams when he talked about his future. I taught him how to stand tall, how to be honest, how to carry our family's name with dignity. I believed every word I said, and I thought he did too. Even when he became a man, when he married and had his own responsibilities, I was there. I helped cover his debts when he stumbled. I guided him when he failed in business. I opened doors with my contacts to help him find new opportunities. And through all of it, I thought, this is what a father does. I even built wealth with him in mind. Over decades, I grew careful investments, shares in businesses, and real estate. I put aside money in accounts I never touched, letting it grow, so that when my time ended, he would inherit more than I ever dreamed of owning. By the time I reached my old age, it was worth $4.5 million. That was my legacy. That was his future. I imagined him one day sitting with his children, telling them, "My father gave me everything." I thought those meals we would share in my later years, simple dinners at the table, would be filled with gratitude, respect, and love. I thought he would look at me as the man who built his life from nothing, who carried him on my back when the world was too heavy. I thought food would be a symbol of family, a reminder of the bond between us. But I was wrong. Disrespect does not arrive like a storm all at once. It creeps in slowly, like a shadow at sunset, stretching quietly until it covers everything. At first, I dismissed the signs, telling myself he was just tired, stressed, or distracted. But deep down, I knew something was changing in him. It began with words. When I asked him for help, something as small as reaching a jar from the high cupboard or picking up my medicine from the store, he sighed heavily, as if I had asked for the world. "You can do it yourself," he snapped once, not even looking up from his phone. The words stung, but I convinced myself it was nothing. He was just busy. Then came the names. Slow. Useless. Dead weight. At first, they were said with a laugh, as though they were jokes. But jokes repeated often enough lose their humor. They became sharper each time, cutting deeper into my chest. He spoke them in front of others, his friends, even relatives, turning my age into a weapon to mock me. I would sit in silence, smiling weakly to keep the peace, while my heart broke a little more each time. Meals together, once the proudest moments of my life, became stages of humiliation. He ate quickly, noisily, without care, while tossing sharp remarks at me. "Why are you chewing so slow?" "You eat like an old goat," relatives noticed, their eyes shifting uncomfortably, but no one said a word. I lowered my head and kept eating, swallowing not just my food, but my pride. The respect I thought I had earned through decades of sacrifice vanished like smoke. The boy who once held my hand while crossing the road now walked ahead of me, leaving me struggling behind. The son who once hugged me after school now barely looked at me unless it was to throw another insult. And the hardest part? He acted as though it was normal, as though cruelty was the new language of family. I told myself he would change. I told myself he was just going through a difficult time. I told myself I had to endure it because he was my blood, my son, the heir to everything I had built. But each day, the insults grew louder, the looks colder, the silence heavier. It was only a matter of time before his disrespect turned into something darker, something I never imagined I would live to see. It happened on a night I will never forget. I had spent the afternoon quietly in the kitchen, preparing a small meal for myself. Nothing fancy, nothing costly, just a simple plate of rice, vegetables, and a little broth. My hands shook as I chopped the food, not from fear, but from the frailty of age. Cooking for myself had become a ritual, one of the last things I could still do with dignity. As the smell filled the air, I felt a flicker of pride. I placed the plate carefully on the table, ready to eat. But before I could even lift my spoon, my son walked in. His eyes landed on the plate, and a cruel smile spread across his face. He stepped closer, towering over me, and without a word, he grabbed the food. Confused, I looked up. "Son, that's my dinner," I said softly. He sneered, holding the plate in one hand as if it meant nothing. "Dinner? For you?" He chuckled darkly. And then he did it. With one swift motion, he walked over to the trash bin, tilted the plate, and let everything fall inside. The food I had carefully prepared, the food I was moments away from eating, landed with a dull thud among scraps and garbage. I froze, my heart sinking, my stomach twisting. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. He turned back to me, his eyes cold, his mouth curled into a mocking smile. "You don't deserve food," he said flatly. "Go hungry." Then he laughed. A deep, cruel laugh that echoed in my ears. He walked away without another glance, leaving me staring at the empty table, my dinner gone, my dignity thrown in the trash with it. I sat there in silence for what felt like hours. The smell of the food still lingered, but my plate was gone. My stomach growled, but hunger was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. The boy I once carried on my back when he was too tired to walk, the boy I once fed when I went hungry, had grown into a man who denied me the very thing I had once sacrificed everything to give him. Food. It wasn't just the loss of a meal, it was the loss of respect. It was the moment I realized that in his eyes, I was no longer a father. I was nothing, a beggar in my own home. And though I said nothing that night, though I sat silently as tears slipped down my cheeks, something inside me broke, and something else hardened. That night, I sat alone at the table, staring at the empty space where my dinner had been. The chair across from me was empty, yet the echo of his laughter filled it like a ghost. My stomach groaned with hunger, but it was not the emptiness in my belly that hurt the most. It was the emptiness in my heart. I felt tears slide down my cheeks slowly, one by one, as though even they were too tired to fall quickly. My hands rested on the wooden table, trembling, not from age this time, but from humiliation. I thought back to the years when hunger had been my constant companion, back when I was younger, working long shifts for pennies. Nights when I would come home with only a small loaf of bread, and I would cut it into 2 pieces, one for my son, one for myself. And when that wasn't enough, I gave him both. I remembered lying in bed with an empty stomach, listening to his small breaths as he slept peacefully, his belly full because I had chosen to go without. I told myself then, this is what a father does. Now here I was, decades later, with nothing but the cold echo of those sacrifices. The very child I had starved for, the very boy I had carried on my shoulders, had thrown my meal into the trash and told me to go hungry. It felt like a cruel joke life had played on me, to spend a lifetime feeding someone, only for them to mock my hunger in return. The room was cold, the air heavy. I lowered my head into my hands, my shoulders shaking quietly as I tried not to sob. Pride kept me silent, but my heart wanted to cry out. I had given him everything. Every coin, every comfort, every hour of my life was poured into him like water into dry soil. But instead of a tree of gratitude, all that grew was arrogance and cruelty. I shifted in my chair, my bones aching, my stomach still empty. But the greater ache was not in my body. It was in my soul. I realized that night that I was not just hungry for food. I was hungry for respect, for love, for the simple dignity of being treated as a father. But as I sat there, humiliated and broken, another realization began to form. Hunger and humiliation are powerful teachers. And while my son thought he had reduced me to nothing, he had forgotten something very important. I still had power. Power he couldn't see. Power he thought he already owned. And one day soon, he would learn just how wrong he was. As the night dragged on, my stomach aching with hunger and my body heavy with exhaustion, I sat in silence and thought. My son believed he had broken me. He believed that throwing my food in the trash and mocking me as worthless was proof that I had no power left in this world. But what he didn't realize, what he had completely forgotten, was that power doesn't always live in muscle or youth. Sometimes the sharpest weapon is paper. Sometimes strength is not in the body, but in the pen. Because while he strutted around the house as though everything was already his, the truth was far different. He believed the inheritance, the $4.5 million in savings, businesses, and properties, was guaranteed. He bragged about it to friends, acted as if the money was already sitting in his account, as if the estate was already under his name. He carried himself like a king, certain that his father's fortune was nothing more than his birthright. But it wasn't. Every deed, every account, every share, every last cent was still mine. My name on the papers, my signature on the documents, my control over the wealth that he thought belonged to him. And with one stroke of a pen, I could erase him from that future entirely. I leaned back in my chair that night, staring at the shadows on the wall, and felt something stir in me that I hadn't felt in years. Power. Quiet, steady power. He thought he had stripped me of dignity by making me sit hungry at an empty table. But dignity isn't lost when someone laughs at you. Dignity is lost when you surrender. And I was not ready to surrender. I thought of my stepson, the one my son had mocked endlessly. My stepson never had much, but he always greeted me with respect. He never looked at me like I was a burden. He never threw my sacrifices in my face. If anyone deserved the fortune I built, it was him. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, why should cruelty inherit wealth when respect exists in another? My son thought my silence was weakness, but my silence was planning. And soon, the same man who laughed as he threw my dinner in the trash would learn that I could throw away his future with even less effort. The next morning, I rose earlier than usual. My stomach was still empty, but my heart was no longer weak. The humiliation from the night before lingered like a scar, but instead of breaking me, it sharpened me. My son thought he had reduced me to nothing. He thought I would suffer silently until the end, dependent on him, powerless to change my fate. But what he forgot was that I had built every brick of his world, and I still had the power to take it away. I dressed slowly, carefully, as though preparing for battle. My hands, though aged and wrinkled, felt steady. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see a defeated old man. I saw a father ready to deliver justice in the only language his arrogant son would understand: inheritance. I walked out of the house while he was still asleep, his arrogance stretched across the bed like a king on a throne. He didn't even stir as I left. He didn't care where I went because he thought he already owned me, owned everything. That was his mistake. At the lawyer's office, I was greeted with surprise. He had known me for years, had helped me draft the original will that promised everything to my son. When I told him why I was there, his expression changed, from curiosity to sympathy to approval. "Are you certain about this?" he asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes searched mine. "Yes," I said, with more firmness than I'd spoken in years. He threw my dinner in the trash and laughed. "He has treated me not as a father, but as a beggar. My sacrifices mean nothing to him. He will not receive my name, my wealth, or my legacy. The lawyer nodded slowly and began to prepare the documents. Page after page, my son's name disappeared. No longer the heir, no longer the chosen one, no longer entitled to the $4.5 million estate he bragged about so carelessly. And in his place, I wrote another name, my stepson. The one he mocked, the one he despised, the one who had shown me respect. Signing those papers was not an act of revenge. It was an act of balance. For years, my son had tilted the scale with cruelty, and now I had restored it with justice. My signature was not just ink, it was freedom. When the lawyer slid the final page across the desk, I picked up the pen, my hand steady, my heart calm. With one stroke, I cut him out of my life. With another, I gave everything to the man he hated most. As the ink dried, so did the last traces of my hesitation. It was done. And as I left the office that morning, the sunlight felt warmer on my skin than it had in years. For the first time in a long time, I was no longer carrying humiliation. I was carrying justice. Walking out of the lawyer's office that morning, I could feel the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. But I knew one thing clearly. It wasn't enough to just cut him out. My son's arrogance was too strong, his belief in entitlement too deep. If I left even the smallest gap, he would find a way to claw back what he believed belonged to him. That could not happen. Justice, if it was to mean anything, had to be permanent. So I went further. I asked my lawyer to not only erase my son from the will, but to lock every cent of the $4.5 million so tightly that no contest, no appeal, no manipulation could ever bring it back into his hands. We created trusts, layered protections, and airtight clauses that made the inheritance unbreakable. My son would not only lose his fortune, he would live to watch it slip into the hands of the one man he hated most, his stepbrother. For years, my son mocked him, called him an outsider, laughed at him during gatherings, dismissed him as unworthy of carrying the family name. Yet it was that same stepbrother who showed me respect. That same stepbrother who never raised his voice, never threw an insult, never mocked me for my age. He was not born of my blood, but he carried something far greater: decency. And in that decency, I saw the true heir to my legacy. So I made sure the transfer was not just symbolic. It was powerful. I reassigned business shares, shifted accounts, and tied property deeds directly into my stepson's name. I ensured that not a single loophole remained, that even if my arrogant son hired the best lawyers in the world, he would find nothing but closed doors. And I didn't do it in silence. I instructed that when the papers became public, my stepson's name would stand proudly beside mine, proof that respect had triumphed over blood, that dignity was worth more than arrogance. It wasn't just inheritance, it was a lesson written in law. The twist of fate was complete. The son who laughed as he threw my dinner into the trash now had his entire future thrown away with one stroke of my pen. And the man he mocked, the one he dismissed as nothing, now carried everything. It was justice delivered not by shouting, not by fists, but by reversal, a poetic balance. He had stolen my dignity in front of others, but I had taken his fortune in front of the law. It did not take long for the truth to surface. Secrets of this scale rarely stay hidden. At first, my son laughed when whispers reached him. Relatives murmured about changes to the will, about a transfer, about his stepbrother suddenly holding power he had never held before. My son waved it all off, smirking with that same arrogant tilt of his head. "Lies," he scoffed. "Do you think the old man would ever cut me out? I'm his only blood. I'm the rightful heir. Everything is already mine. But arrogance is fragile, and when it shatters, it does so loudly." When the official documents were read, his face turned from smugness to disbelief. He leaned forward, waiting for his name, but it never came. Instead, the lawyer read out my stepson's name. Line after line, account after account, property after property. Everything was reassigned. $4.5 million in wealth, gone from his hands, secured under another's name. His jaw dropped, his fists clenched, his face flushed red with fury. "This is impossible," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. This has to be a mistake. But it wasn't. The documents were stamped, signed, sealed, and legal. His voice cracked as he raged, but the law was louder than his fury. He stormed into my home that night, his voice thundering through the walls. "How could you do this to me?" he screamed, pacing like a wild animal. "I am your blood. I am your son. You betrayed me." His words were heavy, but my heart felt light. I sat in my chair calmly, staring at the same mouth that once laughed as he threw my dinner into the trash. "No," I said softly. "You betrayed me. You betrayed the years of sacrifice, the food I gave up, the respect I earned. You threw it all away the night you laughed at my hunger. And now I have thrown away your future." Relatives who once looked up to him now looked away in shame. They whispered among themselves, shaking their heads. He brought this on himself. Even those who had once defended him could not excuse him anymore. His arrogance had been tolerated for years, but cruelty toward his own father was a line too far. Now, with his downfall exposed, no one came to his defense. And then there was his stepbrother. When he learned the truth, his eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve this," he said, voice trembling. "But I will honor you with it. I will never treat you the way he did." His words carried humility, gratitude, and respect, qualities my blood son had long since abandoned. The contrast was clear. One son screaming in rage, another speaking softly with dignity. The fallout was complete. The same man who laughed as he stole my meal now stood stripped of his inheritance, and the one he mocked now stood as heir to everything. After the reading of the will, the air in the family shifted. My son, once the loudest voice in every room, suddenly found his words carried no weight. He begged at first, his arrogance stripped bare, reduced to pleading at my feet. "Please, Dad," he said, his eyes red and swollen. "I was wrong. I didn't mean it. Give me another chance. Put my name back." I'll change. His hands clutched mine tightly, the same hands that once tossed my dinner into the trash. I looked at him and saw not remorse, but fear. Not of losing me, but of losing money. When begging failed, anger returned. His voice turned venomous, his words cutting like knives. "You've ruined my life. Do you know what people will say? Do you know how this makes me look?" he shouted. He no longer spoke like a son to a father, but like a man robbed of his crown. Yet the irony was clear. He was never robbed. He had thrown his crown into the fire the night he laughed at my hunger. Threats followed. He threatened to sue, to rally the family, to turn people against me. But each threat fell flat, because the law was unshakable and the family's eyes had opened. One by one, relatives who once admired him stepped back, unwilling to defend a man who had humiliated his own father. At gatherings, he became a ghost in the corner, whispers following him instead of praise. The same mouth that once mocked me was now mocked by others. Meanwhile, his stepbrother carried himself differently. When I handed him the documents, he trembled with gratitude. "I will never waste this," he promised quietly. "I will honor your name." He didn't boast, he didn't laugh, he didn't treat the inheritance as a prize. He treated it as responsibility. And in his humility, I saw what my legacy was meant to be. The aftermath was not noisy, it was silent. My son, once arrogant, was left hollow. His wife grew cold toward him, his friends drifted away, his pride collapsed. He had mocked me as weak, but it was he who had become weak. A man begging, cursing, and raging, with nothing to show for all his arrogance. And me? I ate my meals in peace. No more laughter at my expense, no more plates thrown away. For the first time in years, I tasted food not just with my tongue, but with dignity. Each bite reminded me that I had not been powerless. I had been patient, and patience had given me victory. Justice came not in anger, not in shouting, not in revenge served hot, but in silence, in patience, in ink. My son believed he had stripped me of power when he grabbed my dinner and tossed it into the trash. He laughed that night, thinking I was nothing, a hungry old man too weak to fight back. But what he didn't know was that I still held the one thing he could never steal: choice. And with that choice, I turned his cruelty into his punishment. I lived my final years in peace. My meals were simple, but they were mine. No one mocked me when I ate, no one laughed when I lifted my spoon. I slept each night with calm in my chest, knowing that the wealth I had built through decades of pain and sacrifice was safe in the hands of someone who respected me. My stepson never treated me like a burden. He never mocked my age. He never forgot the sacrifices I had made, and for that, he became my heir, not by blood, but by honor. My other son, the one who threw away my food, lived to see his own plate empty. The inheritance he boasted about, the fortune he believed was guaranteed, was erased with one stroke of my pen. He begged, he cursed, he threatened, but in the end he was left with nothing. He had mocked me as worthless, but it was he who became worthless in the eyes of the family. He had laughed as I went hungry, but now he was the one starved. Not of food, but of future. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to strike him. I simply reminded him that respect is the true currency of inheritance. And when he could not pay it, I gave everything to the one who could. Final thought. He threw away my dinner. I threw away his future. $4.5 million gone with one stroke of a pen.